They sense the transformation, yet cannot articulate it. There's a different energy when you walk into a room now. You're no longer the person you once were, that individual seeking validation, that soul afraid of judgment, that being who altered their frequency to adapt. You no longer vibrate at their level, and this frightens them. Your authentic energy creates a disturbance in their field of falseness. Simply by existing in your truth, you destabilize their lies. You don't need to say anything. You don't need to prove anything. Your presence alone is enough to shift the dynamics of the entire space. They notice the difference but struggle to express it. They see in your eyes a clarity they've never witnessed before. They feel in your posture a confidence that doesn't stem from ego, but from alignment. Your energy no longer asks permission. Your vibration no longer seeks approval. You've finally understood that you were designated to carry a different frequency, not to impress them, but to align the world with truth. You've realized that your power doesn't reside in your words, but in your authenticity. And this devastates them because they've built their entire existence on performance, on appearances, on external validation. They cannot comprehend how someone who endured so many trials can now stand so straight. They cannot fathom how someone who was so wounded can now radiate such power. You've become a living paradox to them, an enigma they cannot solve with their old rules. And this profoundly disturbs them. You've entered a frequency of truth, so powerful that lies cannot exist in your presence. You've activated an energy field so clear that falseness dissolves instantly when it contacts you. And most fascinating is that you're not actively doing anything. You're simply existing in your complete authenticity. Perhaps you've wondered why certain people have distanced themselves from you lately. Maybe you've questioned why some individuals seem irritated in your presence even when you say nothing provocative. The truth is that your elevated vibration acts as a detector of falsehood. Your pure energy functions as a revealer of their shadows. When someone lives in lies and meets someone who exists in truth, the encounter becomes unbearable for the one who lies. Not because you've judged or confronted them, but because your presence reflects their own lack of authenticity back to them. You've become the mirror they refuse to look at. And perhaps you don't yet realize how profoundly the game has changed. Maybe you don't yet see how much the power dynamic has reversed. In the past, you were the one seeking validation. You were the one feeling insecure. You were the one wondering if you were good enough. Now they are the ones feeling inadequate in your presence. They are the ones doubting themselves. They are the ones feeling something missing from their lives when they see you standing in your truth, effortlessly, without explanations, without apologies. You never declared yourself superior. You never proclaimed yourself a victor. You simply stopped playing their game, and this has left them completely disoriented. Number 2, the game changed the moment you stopped seeking approval. You grew tired of modifying your energy to fit into spaces not created for authenticity. You became weary of dimming your brightness so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. You abandoned the desire to convince anyone that you deserved a seat at the table. Instead, you began creating your own table. You started attracting people who resonate with your authentic frequency. You began creating spaces where truth is the primary currency of exchange. And now, those who underestimated you, those who excluded you, those who judged you, watch from a distance, confused and fascinated. They don't understand how your new reality works. They cannot conceive how someone can thrive without playing by their rules. They cannot process how someone can shine without their approval. Their entire power structure was based on the idea that they decide who deserves success, who merits recognition, who is worthy of abundance. But you've stepped out of their matrix. You've demonstrated that there's far greater power in aligning with your truth than in conforming to their expectations. You've shown that there's an infinitely stronger force in being completely yourself than in being a diluted version of what they believe you should be. And perhaps you wonder, but I haven't done anything special. I haven't devised any elaborate revenge plan. I haven't actively tried to overthrow them. Exactly. This is the most powerful part of the entire equation. You haven't tried to destroy anyone. You haven't tried to win at anyone's expense. You simply decided to exist in your complete, unfiltered, unmodified truth. And this simple decision has had profound consequences in the energy field surrounding you. Because when you begin vibrating at the frequency of authenticity, everything false cannot withstand your presence. When you start radiating the clarity of your purpose, everything confused and misaligned begins to disintegrate. They now notice that you no longer react to their provocations as before. They observe that you can no longer be manipulated with the same old tactics. They see that you no longer respond to their dramas, their power games, their attempts to diminish you, not because you've become insensitive, but because you've become impervious to energies that no longer resonate with your current frequency. You've reached a level of clarity where you can see exactly what's happening, can feel the intentions behind words, can discern truth behind facades. And this ability makes you practically immune to manipulation. Remember when you feared rejection? Remember when you were afraid of judgment? Remember when you believed you needed their approval to be whole? Those days are gone. Now you understand that their rejection was actually direction. Their judgment was actually projection, and your need for approval was just a temporary illusion installed by a system that thrived on your energetic dependence. Now you know you are complete in and through yourself. You understand that your validation comes from within, from alignment with your truth, from connection with your purpose. And this realization has completely freed you. Number 3. Your metamorphosis has been so subtle that they're only now beginning to grasp the magnitude of what has happened. Your vibration changed gradually, day by day, choice by choice, realization by realization. It wasn't a sudden, spectacular transformation. It was a quiet revolution, a constant recalibration of your frequency until you came to operate at a completely different level. And now when they look at you, they no longer recognize the person before them. They see the same physical form, but feel an entirely different presence. And this incongruity deeply troubles them. You've become an anomaly in their system, a discrepancy in their algorithm, a variable they cannot process. Because you now operate by different laws, you function according to different principles, you exist in a different reality. A reality where authenticity is the primary source of power, where alignment is the path to abundance, where truth is the foundation of any lasting creation. They still operate in the old paradigm, where manipulation is considered intelligence, where appearances are confused with substance, where external validation is valued more than internal integrity. And perhaps you wonder how this change occurred. How did you go from being manipulated to being imperturbable? How did you evolve from seeking approval to radiating authentic authority? The answer is simple yet profound. You repeatedly chose truth over convenience. You chose the discomfort of growth instead of the comfort of stagnation. You chose to face your inner realities instead of avoiding them. You chose to confront your shadows instead of projecting them onto others. And each small choice built, molecule by molecule, a new reality for you. A reality where you are no longer victim, but creator. Now, when they try to pull you back into old patterns, into old dynamics, into old games, they discover that you simply no longer respond to the same stimuli as before. Not because you're pretending, not because you're trying to be superior, but because you literally no longer operate at the same frequency. It's as if they were trying to open a door with an old key, not realizing the entire lock has been changed. You haven't intentionally blocked the door. You've simply evolved beyond the old access mechanisms. You now operate with a new set of codes, a new energetic language, a new vibratory frequency. Have you ever realized that those who hurt you most were actually the most powerful catalysts for your transformation? Have you realized that their rejection was actually a blessing in disguise? That their betrayal was actually an invitation to autonomy? That their abandonment was actually an impetus towards self-sufficiency? Everything, absolutely everything, has contributed to this new version of you. Even the moments when you felt downtrodden, even the periods when you thought you had lost everything, even the experiences that seemed like they would destroy you, all were, in fact, necessary steps toward this new frequency at which you now vibrate. Number 4. They don't understand why you can no longer be provoked with the same old tactics. They don't understand why you can no longer be manipulated with the same words that once threw you into emotional chaos. They don't understand why You no longer react to the same triggers that once made you doubt yourself. What they don't realize is that you're not pretending to be unshakable. You truly no longer resonate with these low frequencies. You've spent so much time in silence, reconnecting with your essence, recalibrating your internal system, that now you act from a place of profound clarity, not reactivity. They still try to insert you into their equations, not realizing that you now operate with completely different variables. They still try to read you with their old lenses, without understanding that you've undergone a transformation that has made you illegible to their outdated instruments. You're not intentionally enigmatic. Your current frequency simply cannot be correctly interpreted by their obsolete systems. It's like trying to listen to an FM radio station on an AM receiver. The frequencies simply cannot harmonize. And precisely this impossibility of fitting you in, classifying you, predicting you completely destabilizes them. You've understood a truth that few realize. Ultimate power doesn't come from controlling others, but from self-mastery. It doesn't come from manipulating external circumstances, but from aligning with your inner truth. It doesn't come from force, but from coherence. And when you achieve this state of internal coherence, when your thoughts, emotions, words, and actions are perfectly aligned with your essence, you become literally unstoppable. Not because you force, but because you flow. Not because you impose, but because you align with the much greater forces of authenticity, truth, purpose. See how the dynamics change when you enter a room now. Notice how superficial conversations stop. Observe how masks begin to slip. Notice how those operating from falseness suddenly become agitated, defensive, excessively vocal, or, conversely, strangely silent. Not because you said something provocative, not because you accused anyone, but because your authentic presence automatically creates a field of truth where falseness cannot hide. You do nothing actively. You just exist in your natural, unmodified frequency, and this existence itself acts as a catalyst for everything not aligned with truth. And perhaps you wonder, but what about those who still seem to thrive in lies? What about those who still seem to win through manipulation? Patience. The universe operates according to perfect laws, even if its timeline doesn't always align with our human impatience. Everything not built on truth will eventually collapse under its own weight. Everything not aligned with authenticity will sooner or later encounter increasing friction. This isn't an act of cosmic revenge. It's the simple operation of natural laws of frequency and resonance. What doesn't vibrate in harmony with truth will inevitably encounter more and more resistance until its frequency must either recalibrate or disintegrate. Number 5. Have you noticed how new people begin to appear in your life? People who resonate with your new frequency, people who feel at home in the presence of your authenticity, people who aren't intimidated by your power but inspired by it. This is another sign that the game has changed in your favor. You no longer need to search for authentic connections. They find you. You no longer need to convince anyone of your worth. Those who can recognize your frequency are naturally drawn to you as if by magnetism. This happens not because you've become someone different, but because you've finally become who you've always been, without filters, without compromises, without apologies. These new people in your life don't see you as a means to achieve their goals. They don't value you for what they can get from you. They don't appreciate you for how you make them feel about themselves. They simply recognize you as an aligned soul, as an authentic being, as a conscious creator. And this recognition comes from a much deeper place than the mind. It comes from the level of essence. It's a recognition that surpasses personality, that transcends social roles, that completely ignores your external performances and achievements. It's a recognition of your frequency, your vibration, your true essence. In the past, you wondered why you attracted so much falseness into your life. You wondered why you were constantly surrounded by people who take without giving, who promise without delivering, who pretend without being. Now you understand. You attracted these experiences because you were operating at a frequency of need, of lack, of external validation. You attracted these reflections because you still had lessons to learn about your power, your value, your sovereignty. They weren't punishments. They were teachings. They weren't obstacles. They were opportunities for calibration. The universe wasn't punishing you, it was preparing you. And now, after absorbing these lessons, after integrating these teachings, after recalibrating at the essence level, you naturally attract experiences that are aligned with your new frequency. Not because you try, not because you force, not because you manipulate circumstances, but because the law of resonance operates perfectly and impeccably. Like attracts like. Frequency attracts frequency. Truth attracts truth. Authenticity attracts authenticity. There are no accidents in this universe. There are no coincidences in this matrix. Every encounter, every opportunity, every connection that appears in your field now is a direct response to the frequency you emit. Do you sometimes fear that this new state of yours is temporary? Do you occasionally worry that you'll slip back into old patterns? Does the idea that you might lose this clarity, this power, this peace frighten you? It's natural to have these moments of doubt. You're still human, still navigating between dimensions of consciousness. But you must understand a fundamental truth. Once you've experienced the frequency of authenticity, once you've felt the power of aligning with your truth, you can no longer be satisfied with anything less. You may have moments of regression. You may have periods of confusion. You may have intervals of misalignment. But you can no longer permanently dwell in falseness. You've tasted the freedom of authenticity, and this taste will remain in your being forever, calling you back to truth every time you stray. Number 6. Have you noticed how some relationships have completely changed in their dynamics? How some people who previously treated you with indifference now constantly seek your attention? How some who ignored you now obsessively follow you? How some who judged you now seek your approval? And at the same time, how some who seemed so important in your life have now completely disappeared or become peripheral figures? This is not a coincidence. This is not an accident. It is the direct effect of recalibrating your frequency. It is the natural consistency of the fact that you no longer operate in the same energetic dimension as before. Those who want to remain in your life now must relate to you in a completely different way. They can no longer use the old tactics. They can no longer resort to the old manipulations. They can no longer rely on the old power dynamics. Either they adapt to your new frequency, or they find another energy field in which to operate. There is no other option. And that's precisely why some completely disappear, while others suddenly seem fascinated by you. The former are those who cannot or will not raise their frequency to match yours. The latter are those who feel at an almost unconscious level that you have access to something they deeply desire, an authenticity they crave, a clarity they admire, a power they want to understand, but you're no longer interested in convincing anyone of your value. You're no longer willing to diminish your frequency to make others feel comfortable. You're no longer willing to wear masks to fit into spaces not created for authenticity. In the past, perhaps you would have done anything to be accepted, to be included, to be validated. Now you understand that inclusion that requires compromising your truth is not inclusion worth treasuring. Acceptance that depends on your performance is not acceptance worth seeking. Validation that demands dimming your light is not validation worth desiring. You now operate from a place of complete sovereignty, a place where you understand that you are the creator of your experience, that you are the architect of your reality, that you are the generator of your frequency. You no longer wait for others to give you permission to be who you truly are. You no longer seek external approval to validate your choices. You no longer depend on others' confirmation to recognize your worth. Instead, you are anchored in a profound certainty that your authenticity is the greatest gift you can offer this world, and that alignment with your truth is the most powerful position from which you can operate. And perhaps you wonder, but what about those who still cannot see the change in me? What about those who still treat me as the old version of myself? Patience and compassion. Some people are so stuck in their own limited perceptions, so caught in their own projections, that they literally cannot see your transformation. Some are so attached to the narrative they've created about you that they will maintain it even in the face of your evident evolution. This is not your failure. It is their limitation, and you can choose to carry compassion for this limitation without allowing yourself to be reduced by it again, without letting yourself be defined by it again, without permitting yourself to be limited by it again. Number 7. Have you noticed how things that previously seemed impossible now manifest with incredible ease in your life? How opportunities that once seemed inaccessible now appear out of nowhere? How resources that once seemed limited now flow in abundance? And in exchange, how some things for which you previously struggled hard now seem to disappear from your field without any effort on your part. This is not a coincidence. It is the direct effect of your alignment with your truth, with your authenticity, with your real purpose. When you operate from your natural frequency, the entire universe conspires to facilitate your journey, not because you're special in an egoic sense, but because you're aligned in a cosmic sense. The universe functions according to perfect laws of frequency and resonance. When you vibrate at the frequency of authenticity, you naturally attract experiences that are aligned with this frequency. When you operate from your truth, you become a magnet for opportunities that are in harmony with your truth. When you manifest your real essence, without filters and without distortions, you create an energy field that attracts exactly the resources, connections, and circumstances you need to fulfill your purpose. This is not magic in a superstitious sense. It is an exact science of frequency and manifestation. In the past, perhaps you struggled and strived to create the results you wanted. You pushed, you forced, you manipulated, you controlled, and yet the results were often below expectations or required constant effort to maintain. Now you understand a completely different way of creating, not through force but through alignment, not through control but through flow, not through manipulating external circumstances but through calibrating your internal frequency. You've learned to create not from fear and lack, but from love and abundance, not from separation but from unity, not from fragmentation but from wholeness. And perhaps you wonder, but why do some old desires seem to disappear from my life? Why do some goals I struggled so hard for now seem irrelevant or unattainable? The answer is profound, because those desires and goals were not aligned with your true purpose. They came from ego, not from essence. They were generated by fear, not by love. They were created by your conditioned mind, not by your infinite soul. And as your frequency rises, as your consciousness expands, as your clarity increases, you begin to see the difference between what your ego wants and what your soul knows you came to be and do. Every step you take in authenticity brings you closer to your true destiny. Not a destiny imposed from outside, but a destiny that naturally unfolds from within your being as layers of conditioning dissolve. Every choice you make from alignment propels you toward your highest expression. Not an expression dictated by external standards, but an expression that springs organically from your unique essence. And as you continue to choose truth over convenience, authenticity over approval, alignment over acceptance, you will discover that your entire life becomes a perfect expression of your divine frequency, not because you strive, but because you surrender, not because you control, but because you allow, not because you force, but because you flow. Number 8. They feel something has changed, but they can't quite figure out what. They feel you have access to something they don't understand. They feel you operate by different rules, and this feeling profoundly destabilizes them. In the past, they could anticipate you, they could read you, they could manipulate you. Now you've become an enigma to them, not because you're trying to be mysterious or because you're playing mind games, but because the frequency at which you now operate is literally indecipherable to those stuck in the old paradigm. It's as if you were speaking a completely different language, not verbally, but energetically. You're not trying to confuse them. You're not trying to intimidate them. You're not trying to impress them. You simply exist in a state of alignment with your truth, and this state itself creates a field of coherence that disturbs the fields of incoherence around you. Your authentic presence acts as a catalyst for transformation, either by attracting those who are ready to evolve or by repelling those who prefer to remain in stagnation. You do nothing actively. You just exist in your natural frequency, and this existence itself is enough to create waves of transformation around you. It's as if you were a perfectly tuned instrument in an orchestra of untuned instruments. You don't need to play louder, you just need to play in your true tone. And the contrast will be evident to all who have ears to hear. You don't need to impose yourself, to explain yourself, to justify yourself. You just need to be completely present in your truth, and this presence will speak louder than any words ever could. Now, when they try their old tactics, when they launch emotional baits that would have completely destabilized you before, when they use words that once would have deeply hurt you, they observe that you no longer respond as before. Not because you've become insensitive, but because you've become impervious to manipulation. Not because you no longer feel, but because you feel from a place of clarity, not confusion. Not because you've closed yourself off, but because you've opened yourself so completely that nothing not aligned with truth can penetrate your energy field. You've become so anchored in your own frequency that external turbulence can no longer unbalance you. And perhaps you don't yet realize how powerful this position is. Perhaps you don't yet see how completely the game has changed. In the past, they had the power to change your state, to influence your perception, to direct your energy. Now, you hold the power, not a power of domination, but a power of creation. Not a power over others, but a power over your own reality. Not a power of control, but a power of alignment. And this power cannot be taken from you, because it doesn't depend on external circumstances, others' approval, or your social position. This power springs from within you, from your connection with truth, from your alignment with authenticity, from your tuning with your natural frequency. Number 9. Have you noticed how certain people who hurt you in the past now seem inexplicably drawn to you? How those who abandoned you now seek to re-establish connection? How those who judged you now seem fascinated by your transformation? This is not a coincidence. It is the direct effect of the fact that you no longer carry resentment, you no longer hold grudges, you no longer invest energy in the desire for revenge or in the fantasy of proving them wrong. Instead, you've channeled all this energy into your own transformation, your own healing, your own evolution. And now, ironically, they are the ones seeking you, following you, intrigued by your new radiance. But you no longer need their validation. You no longer crave their approval. You no longer seek their confirmation. You've learned the most powerful truth, that you are enough exactly as you are, that your worth doesn't depend on external recognition, that your power doesn't derive from social acceptance. You've understood that being yourself, authentically and unfiltered, is the most revolutionary action you can take in a world obsessed with appearances, with masks, with performance. And this realization has completely freed you from the need to impress anyone, to convince anyone, to prove anything to anyone. In the past, perhaps you dreamed of the moment they would recognize how much they hurt you. Perhaps you imagined scenarios where they would apologize, where they would admit they were wrong, where they would finally validate your pain. Now, you understand that you don't need these external validations to heal your inner wounds. You can give yourself the recognition, acceptance, and love you sought from others. You can give yourself permission to feel, to heal, to evolve, without waiting for someone outside to confirm your experience. And precisely this emotional autonomy, this spiritual self-sufficiency, this energetic sovereignty, have freed you from the chains of dependence on external validation. And perhaps you wonder, but what do I do with those who now seek to return to my life after hurting me deeply? What do I do with those who now seem fascinated by me after rejecting me? The answer is simple. You decide from clarity, not from reactivity. You can choose to allow certain people back into your life if you feel their frequency has risen enough to match yours now. Or you can choose to continue your path without them, without resentment, without judgment, just with the simple recognition that your paths have separated. You are no longer constrained by the old rules of attachment, obligation, guilt. You are free to create connections based exclusively on authentic resonance, on balanced energy exchange, on mutual recognition. Notice how certain people now seem intimidated by you, even though you do nothing to intimidate them. Notice how some become defensive in your presence, even though you don't attack them in any way. Notice how others become excessively vocal or, conversely, strangely silent when you're around them. This happens because your authentic presence acts as a mirror reflecting their own shadows, their own masks, their own inauthenticities. You don't project anything onto them. You just exist in your complete truth, and this existence itself creates a contrast that makes their falsehoods visible. You don't try to expose anyone. You simply refuse to participate in the collective illusion anymore. And this quiet but firm refusal is more powerful than any direct accusation could ever be. Number 10. The game turned in your favor the moment you understood a fundamental truth, that real power doesn't consist in controlling others, but in being master of your own frequency, not in manipulating external circumstances, but in calibrating your internal state, not in impressing, but in being authentic. In the past, you operated by the rules of a game created by others, a game where external validation was the primary currency, where social acceptance was the supreme objective, where appearances were more valuable than essence. Now you've completely stepped out of that game, not because you lost it, but because you realized it wasn't worth playing in the first place. You now understand that true victory doesn't consist in defeating others, but in freeing yourself from the need to compete. Not in proving you're right, but in aligning with truth. Not in winning others' approval, but in winning your own approval. You no longer play for the gallery, you play for your own integrity. You no longer perform for applause, you create from authenticity. You no longer speak to impress, you speak only when you have something authentic to say. And precisely this complete realignment of your motivations has fundamentally changed the game. You can no longer be manipulated through fear, because you've understood that your essence is beyond any threat. You can no longer be controlled through promises, because you've realized that true fulfillment comes from within, not from without. They still operate by the old rules. They still believe power consists in the number of followers, in the amount of attention, in the volume of applause. They still measure success in terms of comparison, competition, conquest. They still define their worth by how many people validate them, by how many resources they accumulate, by how much influence they exert. You have transcended these limited measurements. You've understood that true power is quiet, not noisy. That true impact is profound, not spectacular. That true influence comes from alignment, not manipulation. And this understanding has placed you in a completely different league, a league where you no longer compete with anyone, because there is no one else playing at your level of consciousness. And perhaps you wonder, but what about recognition? What about tangible rewards? What about concrete evidence that this path of authenticity works? Patience. The universe operates according to perfect laws, but its timeline rarely coincides with our human impatience. Everything created from truth will inevitably be recognized and rewarded, but not necessarily in the ways your ego would desire or at the moment your mind would prefer. Authentic recognition often comes from unexpected directions. Real rewards frequently appear in unanticipated forms. And the most powerful evidence is often the most subtle. A deep inner peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. A clarity that doesn't waver in the face of challenges. A quiet power that doesn't need to announce itself. You've reached that rare point where you no longer need to announce yourself, to explain yourself, to justify yourself. Your presence speaks for you. Your energy communicates your essence. Your frequency transmits your message. You no longer need to proclaim your power. You emanate power. You no longer need to claim your worth. You radiate worth. You no longer need to demonstrate your authenticity. You exist in authenticity, and this simple, undiluted, unfiltered existence is more eloquent than any words could ever be. It's a message that cannot be ignored, misinterpreted, or diminished. It's a message that reaches directly to the essence of beings around you, going beyond their mental judgments, their emotional resistances, their egoic defenses. Number 11. Have you noticed how certain doors that seemed permanently blocked now open effortlessly? How certain opportunities that seemed inaccessible now appear out of nowhere? How certain connections that seemed impossible now materialize miraculously? This isn't magic. It's the science of frequency and resonance. When you operate from your complete truth without distortions and without compromises, you create a magnetic field that attracts exactly the experiences, people, and opportunities that are aligned with your frequency. Not because you actively seek them, not because you strive to manifest them, not because you force them to appear, but because they are naturally attracted to your coherence, your clarity, your authenticity. In the past, perhaps you constantly felt blocked, limited, restricted. Perhaps you felt that no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't advance beyond a certain point. Perhaps you believed that certain doors would remain closed to you forever, that certain experiences weren't destined for you, that certain levels of success, abundance, impact were inaccessible to someone like you. Now you understand that the only real limits were those you accepted in your mind. The only authentic blockages were those you internalized in your beliefs. The only true restrictions were those you incorporated into your identity. And as you freed yourself from these self-imposed limitations, as you've recalibrated your frequency to the level of infinite possibility, as you've aligned your identity with the truth of your essence, you've begun to attract exactly the experiences that reflect this new frequency of yours. And perhaps you wonder, but why do some doors still seem closed? Why do some goals still seem unattainable? Why do some dreams still seem distant? Perhaps because those doors, those goals, those dreams are not aligned with your true purpose. Perhaps because they are created by your conditioned mind, not by your intuitive heart. Perhaps because they are generated by comparison, by external validation, by social programming, not by your authentic inner guidance. When you operate from the frequency of authenticity, you attract not just what you want, but what is truly aligned with your essence. And sometimes, what your ego wants and what your soul knows you need can be very different things. Notice how certain activities that previously energized you now exhaust you. How certain conversations that once stimulated you now bore you. How certain relationships that once seemed essential now seem superficial or even toxic. This isn't a judgment, it's a recalibration. As your frequency rises, as your consciousness expands, as your clarity increases, you naturally begin to resonate only with experiences, conversations, and relationships that are aligned with your new frequency. Not because you consider yourself superior or too good for what was before, but because you simply no longer resonate energetically with those low-frequency experiences. It's as if you're listening to a new radio station, not because you hate the music on the old station, but because you simply can't hear it anymore at the frequency to which you're now tuned. Number 12. Have you noticed a fundamental change in how you respond to challenges? How situations that would have devastated you before now seem like opportunities for growth? How obstacles that would have completely blocked you before now seem like invitations to creativity? How rejections that would have made you doubt yourself before now seem like simple redirections? This is not a coincidence and not an accident. It is the direct result of the fact that you no longer operate from fear but from trust. You no longer create from anxiety but from certainty. You no longer respond from reactivity but from centeredness. You've understood that challenges aren't punishments, they're invitations to expansion. That obstacles aren't blockages, they're opportunities for realignment. That rejections aren't failures, they're protections. In the past, you interpreted every difficulty as a sign that you were doing something wrong, that you weren't enough, that the universe was against you. Now, you understand that exactly the opposite is true. Challenges arise not to punish you, but to prepare you, not to diminish you, but to strengthen you, not to divert you from your path, but to center you more deeply in your truth. You've learned to see each obstacle not as a wall, but as a gate, not as an end, but as a beginning, not as a limitation, but as an invitation to expansion. And this fundamental shift in perspective has completely transformed the way you experience reality. You now understand that the game has turned in your favor, not because external circumstances have miraculously changed, but because you have changed the way you interpret and respond to these circumstances. You've gone from being the victim of your experiences to being the creator of them, from being reactive to events to being a generator of events, from waiting for things to happen to you to making things happen through you. You no longer wait to be saved, healed, fixed, validated by something or someone outside. You've taken complete responsibility for your frequency, for your energy, for your reality. And this assumption of responsibility has placed you in a position of authentic power, a power that doesn't depend on favorable circumstances, supportive relationships, or abundant resources. Perhaps you don't yet fully realize how fundamentally everything has changed. Perhaps you don't yet see how completely the power dynamic has reversed. In the past, you were the one seeking, the one begging, the one adapting. Now you are the one attracting, the one allowing, the one creating. You no longer seek anyone's approval. You offer your approval selectively, only to those and those experiences that are aligned with your frequency. You no longer try to fit into spaces that weren't created for you. You create your own spaces, your own realities, your own opportunities. You no longer modify who you are to fit into limited paradigms. You manifest new paradigms that perfectly fit who you truly are. And perhaps you wonder how this miraculous change happened. How did you go from feeling small and powerless to feeling deeply connected with your authentic power? From feeling a victim of circumstances to feeling a creator of your reality? From feeling limited by external conditions to feeling expanded by infinite possibilities? The answer is simple yet profound. You chose, repeatedly and consistently, truth over convenience, authenticity over approval, alignment over acceptance. You chose to confront your shadows instead of projecting them onto others, to take responsibility for your energy instead of blaming external circumstances, to recognize your power instead of cultivating victimhood. And each of these small but courageous choices built, molecule by molecule, your new reality. The game turned in your favor, not because you won against someone else, but because you stopped playing by rules that weren't created for authenticity. You didn't defeat anyone. You freed yourself. You didn't dominate anyone. You empowered yourself. You didn't manipulate anyone. You aligned yourself. And this complete realignment with your truth, with your authenticity, with your purpose, created a new reality where you are no longer subject to manipulation, judgment, limitation. A reality where you are sovereign, you are creator, you are the generator of your own experience.